Welcome to the Ecom Logistics Podcast, your go-to for e-commerce logistics insights, trends, successes, and lessons from the leaders and innovators in our space. How have you found the world after 19 years? And as you're trying to empower these companies that are fighting with sticks and stones, what have been some of the challenges, some opportunities, some lessons that you've learned along the way?
Yeah, I think as logistics professionals or in the operations tech space, everybody, probably most of the people that are listening to this podcast, forget how important the role of operations and logistics is and how much it affects people's lives in a positive way. I just think that's what it's all about. And you have to remember that when we're pushing containers around or talking about truckloads and moving things all over the globe, right? It all comes back to some end. And I think it's important to remember operations people get. It's the back end and it's lost a lot, but it's really what you said, the world's messy and someone has to make it happen no matter what. To your question, how do you solve the problem? I would say the thing that's been interesting is when we first started this company, I think we positioned it as we're going to try to make people like Amazon. It had flaws, but it was an interesting North Star to start with. What became apparent as we started going to market and selling to folks is it was less about trying to recreate Amazon's business model in other people's companies. Yep. It was more about the approach. Mm-hmm. For example, we started as almost like retail e-commerce, right? And it was very oriented towards that. And I think over the years, it's like we've been pulled more and more to logistics service providers or third-party logistics providers filling on behalf of customers. And they have a different set of needs and different things. Right. And then on the other side, we're also getting more and more into what I would call the B2B space loosely, which is everything from pharma to medical devices to parts distribution. My hypothesis in that space is you're watching the same patterns that emerged with Amazon, where you went from large amounts of distribution in batch to fine grain, real time, just in time, single piece flow networks where these companies are going. But the business model they're working against is different than Amazon. On the retail side, if you're a subscription heavy company, you have a different set of needs than a company selling $1,000 handbags, which is different than maybe a company that really does have like dog food or something that needs to stay frozen, right? And so all those, stay cool, so it needs to be delivered fast for that reason, right? So all those different things. But the approach of take a data first mentality, try to use data to optimize the problem, implement automation to get to scale, and then also work back from what's the actual need as opposed to how do I push it in versus like start with the customer and kind of work back from what you're trying to accomplish. And that customer might be a dealership, someone that a 3PL is selling to, or it might be someone else. But that approach of figure out what the customer needs, optimize it using data, and then make sure you're implementing all of this through automation so that, that you can scale and do this in a repeatable way with all the control points of using metrics to work back from this and continuing to grind through this stuff, which is all very, very Amazonian, right? I think startups versus Amazon was a bit of a shock to the system because I don't think you totally realize when you're at Amazon, even if you're a humble person, you start to believe that some of these things you're accomplishing are you versus what is part of the Amazon machinery. When you leave that world and you go on your own, everything has to be earned and proven, right? And that was this lesson or this like kind of transformation I had to go through. If you set a product up on Amazon, you're going to get 10 zillion views on it without even no matter what it is, just because there's so much volume. And kudos to Jeff Bezos and all of the people that came on that journey, including myself, to get it to where it's at. But if you're on your own, you have to really be clear about what is your valuation, and you have to understand that you have to focus on the right thing and try to target the things with the high ROI, given you have limited resources, and keep iterating and be diligent on building that business. And for me, my experience in building this, it's been an incredibly fun journey with a lot of stress and a lot of exuberant happiness along the way. But it's definitely been humbling what is actually required to get to these next stages of growth and moving along.
So we know each other for a long time, and I've followed you and ShipYum for the last few years. Based on everything that I'm seeing in the market and all the success that you've had over the last 12, 18 months, it feels like you've found your product market fit. You went through all of the steps that you just outlined and kept iterating until you found where you can add the most value to your customers. Thanks for listening to the Ecom Logistics podcast. If this episode brought you value, share it with your network and leave us a review. It really helps others discover the show and join in these conversations. And if your team is planning an event in 2025, consider partnering with Ecom Logistics Podcast. We're always looking for meaningful opportunities to elevate conversations shaping logistics and e-commerce. Until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and keep leading the way forward.